This video will focus on making a Hawk Tail Whisk Broom with a woven handle. We have our broomcorn that's been separated out. We have our ripcord, our hanging loop, and scissors, all within arm's reach, as well as our bucket of stems that have been soaking for at least a few hours, but ideally overnight. The first step is to tie 2 overhand knots in the end of our string to create a nice big knot that'll get caught up in our first bunch of broomcorn. I'm going to start this broom a little bit more than a hand's width from the bottom for the sweep end. So I'm going to bury my knot right around there. I bury my knot with the tail reaching towards the handle end of the broom so that I'm more likely to catch the knot when I do my first few wraps. My first 2 wraps around are quite loose so that the knot doesn't pop out. But after I get those few first wraps in, I can stop and pull up nice and tight on that string. And the rest of the broom I can proceed wrapping pretty tight. I'm going to wrap one more time around. So I have 3 full wraps, and this right here is where I first popped out. Just as in the turkey wing whisk, I'm going to use my index finger and angle that string up. I'm going to grab my first bundle to add in. I'm going to tuck that under, moving my index finger to the other side of the bundle to help keep that angle in the string. And I'm going to do my best to match up this end of the broom, the sweep side, but it's not critical that it's perfect. So if you've made a turkey wing whisk, up until now, this is the exact same. Here's where it becomes different. We're going to do a half turn. We're going to try and get this string right here, the working string, to line up with our first 3 rounds down below. And then we're going to grab our next bundle right away. And we're going to tuck that in on the other side of our first bundle. So now we have the first one that we started with flanked by 2 bundles, one on each side. And then on our next half turn, we're going to bring the string back so that it meets up with the angled string and creates that N. Now we're going to wrap so that we have 3 wraps around in the back. There's 3. And then on the next wrap in the front, we're going to angle up again and hold that string up with our index finger. And grab my next bundle of broomcorn, slide that under, moving my index finger to the outside of that bunch to keep that nice angle, trying to keep it consistent with the one before. We're going to do another half turn, grab our next bundle, slide that in on the other side, again trying to keep this sweep end somewhat even and trying to keep these lines parallel to each other. And on the front, we're going to come back around and meet our last angle up. As we add each bundle, we're doing our best to keep them from engulfing the bundles before. I'm going to continue wrapping, so I have 3 wraps around on the back, angle up again on the front. Our next bundle, slide that underneath our string. Again, trying to keep that bundle off to the side, building out the broom in both directions in a planar fashion. We're not trying to make a big round bundle here. At half turn, add our next bundle. Keep those strings parallel to each other, moving up, and then wrap around 3 times. All right, we've just added our last bundle. So we're going to continue around so that we have those 3 wraps on the back and 2 in the front. Now, if you wanted a simple wrapped handle, you could continue up in the same pattern with the 2 wraps around, angle up, 2 wraps, angle up. But in this one, we're going to move our string all the way up to the top of the broom and then add our weaving stems and weave back down. So I'm just going to do a few big wraps with the goal of traveling my string up to the very top of where I want my handle to be. I'm going to grab a handful of the weaving stems and start adding those in. So you'll notice the weaving stems are cut so that one end is tapered to a point and one end is flat. They also have a shiny side and they have the pithy inner side of the stem. We're going to place the stems under the string working around so the pithy inner side is facing towards us and the tapered end, pointed end, is facing down towards the sweep of the broom and slid just about a finger's width underneath our string. As I add in the stems, I'm going to use the string to hold them in place. My right hand is going to hold tension on the string. It's going to keep upward pressure on the broom, while my left hand is going to continue grabbing the stems and sliding them in under the string. For the spacing, you just want the stems to barely touch each other, and then as you pull down on the string, it'll flatten out the stem and really cover up any gaps. Most of these brooms use about 11 to 13 stems. If you're using much more than that, unless they're very narrow stems, you might be putting them too close together. So one thing to think about as we're adding the stems is to keep count. We want an odd number so that we can continue weaving in an over-under pattern without having to do any fancy work to keep it going. You'll see what that means later. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I currently have 9 stems in here, so I want to pick out the number of stems that I think will fit nicely in this last spot to keep me at an odd number. So I want 2 more stems to fit. So I'm just going to look through my stems and choose 2 that I think will nicely fill that gap, since all of the stems are slightly different widths. All right. So I have 11 stems in here. I'm going to wrap the string around one more time just to ensure everything is nice and tight. And then I'm going to angle the string down and wrap it once more around so that it comes down towards the tips of these stems that I just added. And the reason for doing that is when I start bending my stems down, I want the string to pop out and look like that instead of coming out from the top and then potentially sliding up over the stems. So I'm going to keep working around and moving all of these weaving stems underneath the string. As you're moving them under the string, keep in mind that the stems do pretty well to move in this direction when they're soaked, but they don't do very well moving this direction, torquing. You might end up breaking a stem if you're trying to torque the stem under the string. So you're going to be doing a lot of this type of motion back and forth to look at your work, push a couple stems down, and get them under the string, and then bring it back around and tighten. And you want to push all of those stems down underneath that string. Alright, so now we're going to grab our hanging loop. Slide that into position underneath the string. I'm going to wrap around 3 times. So now I'm going to start weaving the handle. And to do that, I'm going to do 3 steps. I'm going to clamp down with my left thumb on the stem and the string right before the stem that I'm weaving under. Then I'm going to move the stem back and then pull the string so it goes up and around and under the stem that I lifted with my thumb. So the next weave, I'm going to do the same thing. Clamp down on that string. And pull that string back around. So again, these stems do well to move this way. We're not taking the stem and shoving it under the string like that. You're going to be much more likely to break a stem if you do that. Clamp down with your thumb, pull the stem back, and then bring the string around. And same as before when we were tucking all of the stems under the string, we're going to be doing a fair bit of back and forth motion and moving your wrists back and forth to get the stems down under the string. Now because we put an odd number of stems in, we went over, under, over, under, over, under, and once we get all the way around, we're now going underneath the stems that we went over before and over the stems that we went under before. If you accidentally ended up with an even number, there's a few workarounds. You can hold 2 stems together and work them like one, or you can take a wider stem like this and take your scissors and just make a little snip towards the bottom and then separate it into 2 stems so you can weave one stem as 2 separate ones. Or there's a variety of really fancy weaving patterns that can be used, which I will discuss in a later video. So again, each individual weave is 3 steps. Clamp down your thumb, pull back the stem, and bring the string around and under. If you don't use your thumb to clamp down on that string, then your string is very likely to travel quickly down, and you're not going to get very many weaves in before you get down to where you made your hawk tail portion of your whisk. And since this is a really decorative whisk, we want this to be visible. So we only have about this much space to work with our weaving. So we want it to be nice and tight. You should be weaving tightly enough that you can see these bumps in the stems in between where the string goes over it. If you pull up with all your might, it is possible that the string could cut through the weavers. But you want enough tension to make those little bubbles. If you have a weak part in your stem, and when you start bending it back, it wants to bend, be sure bend where you don't want it to bend. So you want it to bend where the last string went over the top. But if it's bending mid-stem, make sure you support under it with your thumb, under that weak spot when you bend it back. Another thing that could happen is that your stems could start splitting. So if that happens, just hold them together as though they're one stem still. Continue weaving, and once you finish the broom, you won't even be able to tell that that split is there. These are natural materials, and so nothing's going to be perfect. All right, so I am getting close to where my decorative weaving or wrapping on this broom stopped. It stopped right about there. So I still need to do 3 wraps around. So I'm about a finger width or maybe a pinky's width above where that decorative wrapping stopped. So I'm going to stop weaving here. I'm going to slide in my ripcord so that the handle of my ripcord is towards the very top of the broom, the handle end of the broom. And I'm going to wrap around 3 times. Pretty tight. Alright, so now I'm going to clamp down with my thumb on the string. I'm going to cut my string off of my foot bobbin, feed that string through the loop in the ripcord, and pull the handle of the ripcord under. So now the string is captured under those last 3 rounds, and I can cut that close. Now I'm going to go around, lift back each of my stems, and trim it down. I want to leave a little bit of space below my wraps, but how much is totally up to you and the look of your broom. Okay, so now you'll notice the broom is pretty narrow. So you can just take your broomcorn and start opening up that whisk broom by pulling back on the broomcorn. After you do this once and let your broom sit, it'll likely relax back just a little bit. But come back and do that again 2 or 3 times, and it'll really hold its wide open form. And then you can come back and trim the bottom flat. There's our Hawk Tail Whisk Broom with a woven handle.